Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Roll for Banter podcast. This is a very special episode where we're going to dive into all things D&D and tabletop role-playing and nerd with August from TTRP Genius and a special guest, HOWTORPG, in this episode of Roll for Banter. So, I have taken the liberty of making a couple questions for you. Fred?
Gosh, we won't be here long if it's just a couple of questions then.
It's more than a couple, but I guess I did ask you one off stream, so I did see that you were in a couple other podcasts. How many other side projects do you have going on in the YouTube space?
Well, I've got my YouTube channel, so I live stream 4 times a week now instead of 6, which was nuts. And most of that is designed around making stuff for people to use. So it's long, except in summer, because I'm out, which is why there's no hat. My magician's hat is in the corner, and it can stay there because it's really, really warm today. So I do that, and then I do Wizards and Warp Drives with Nacho Man, who's a patron and a subscriber, and also a New Zealander. And unfortunately, we get along really, really well. So we wind up going and talking about his passions and my passions, and that tends to be pop culture and movies. And so I guess if I was to ever have done another channel, it would have been movies, but I could never understand what to do with movies. Thanks to Nacho. Newton's made it quite clear that I can actually talk about movies, and it doesn't have to be a review about the movie. It can just be what I like and what I don't like about the movie. And apparently maybe a few people might listen to that. And I have a good time for about 2 hours. So I do that. And I built the Dungeon Master Roundtable, which is a collection of YouTubers, some quite famous, some not so famous, some definitely not famous. And it then became the Game Master Roundtable as, I don't know, maybe a clash in my personality, or people not particularly liking the way I operate, or not understanding things, or politics, or whatever it was, turning it into the Game Master Roundtable, and getting Wally DM to sort of pair up with me more, just because there were a lot of people decided they didn't like me very much. So I squared it all down, and I stopped running and saying, "Do you want to come on?" And only to find that people were like, "No."
Yeah, people will be saying that to us shortly, I'm assuming. We'll get there. Hopefully not, but well, hey, we can talk about whatever on here. So since you like movies a lot, I'll kind of tie it into TTRPGs or just RPGs in general. Do you have any like favorite movies that you go back to for like inspiration on like a fantasy setting that you're making? I'll get into some other stuff because I have a ton of questions for you about like your favorite game systems to run, but we could start off with movies. Why not?
Okay, so I guess my favorite science fiction movie is still The Matrix. Before that, I would probably say it would have been Star Wars. But The Matrix. I always loved the fact that when I was sitting in the theater of that movie, I watched somebody when the baby scene. They're picking the babies out of the field. A couple of people got so upset and angry they just walked out, and I was like, wow. I thought it was a mind-blowing scene. You know that it's definitely got impact if somebody decides to leave, particularly in New Zealand, because you can say pretty much anything to a New Zealander to their face, and they don't care. And then that's just sort of how it is here. And then Walk in the Clouds. I know a lot of people don't like that, Keanu Reeves, but I watch it more for the love interest that he's infatuated with. When I'm feeling down, that's the movie I watch. So I've watched that a lot over the years. It happens.
I've never heard of that one, actually. I've never seen that one. Walking
it's set in
across.
a grapevine, a vineyard, old Mexican family. It's a romance. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you like
Yeah.
sci-fi horror? Like one of my favorite sci-fi horror movies is I forgot the name of it. It's not my favorite movie then.
My favorite movie
Probably
is
not.
this
What
movie
was
I
it? What
can't
was it?
remember.
Yeah, I can't
Is
remember
it
the name of
Event
it.
Horizons?
Event Horizon. Event Horizon. I always forget the name of it. Do you like sci-fi horror movies like that?
I like sci-fi. I'm not a fan of horror. I
Okay, so
can
you don't.
appreciate it. It's my brother who likes that. He makes movies and does editing and stuff like that in New Zealand. Um,
Oh, that's cool.
well, I mean, yeah, but his backyard sort of stuff. You're never probably going to see anything he's ever made. I keep asking him, "Have you made your movie yet? Have you finished your 2 movies?" No, I haven't, Fred. Okay, okay. How long this has been going for? Like 30 years now. But I really like science fiction. I'm starting to not like science fiction quite so much, just because I'm 53 now. What was like amazing and the future holds so much, it's becoming kind of a scary, like, science fact is here. Like what was a science fiction before is now a real thing,
Mhm.
and it's not fun as a concept, and it's actually quite terrifying. So yeah, I guess I lean more into fantasy, and I like westerns. I know it's not a thing. I like musicals. No, I'm not gay. Um, Gotta get the question out of the way straight
That
away.
was my next
Yeah,
question. No, I'm just
yeah, that's
kidding.
what you need to. No, no, yeah. Um, you can like a musical and not be gay.
I like the
And then
Labyrinth. That's kind of a musical, right? There's a lot of musical numbers
yeah,
in
it
it.
is. Yeah, yeah. I thought The Labyrinth is a pretty good movie. But then let's
That's
get real.
one of my
The only
favorites.
reason we really liked Labyrinth was because I think Jennifer Connelly was about my age at the time. She's 16 and I was 16.
For the
I was like,
girls, it was David Bowie's wardrobe. That was their favorite part of the movie.
right, yeah, yeah. Could not quite understand. I remember watching an interview with David Bowie, and they were saying, "Oh, yeah, what's it like acting alongside Jennifer Connelly?" He said, she's a very young girl and I am not, and I feel like I'm in the wrong movie. It's really embarrassing, actually. I feel really kind of weird. I can understand that. That makes sense to me. But no, it's a good movie. I enjoy that. I like a lot of different movies. And I usually wind up watching something, even if I can't get all the way through it.
I
It
actually
does happen.
used Jareth the Goblin King as my inspiration for how to roleplay Grozd from 5e. Like, because one of my player characters in my game that I've been DMing. He's a warlock, and that's his patron. So I kind of use David Bowie's like, "Oh, Sarah, Sarah," like the way he just talks. I picture that's how Grozd probably would talk.
Mm.
So that's
You,
kind of
you you
fun.
were working on the Goblin stat block today, weren't you?
I'm still working on making a
You
whole
still working?
bunch of them. Yeah, I've made like I don't
Maybe
know,
if
like
we're lucky, by
20
the
so
time this
far.
episode comes out, it's
Yeah, if we're lucky,
how
it'll be done by then.
long
I
have
feel like
you
So
been
I'm
working
losing
on?
track. Oh my god, like 2 or 3 weeks. It's because I was like, okay, if I just make because in the monster manual they only have like 2 stat blocks, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to rework these and make them cool. And then I'm like, it would be cool if I made a bunch of goblin cavalry. Okay, but then also I should make some clerics and some spellcasters and some fighters. And now I'm just like, I'm making so many. I committed to making too much, but I'm already in this deep, so I'm just
No,
gonna keep making them.
I'm in that boat with you. That's how I was when I did the Null rework, where I was just like, yeah, we have like 4 nulls and like official stat blocks. There's a couple in like some of the different like adventure settings. Like I actually have it right there. Icewind Dale, Rema the Frost Maiden. There's like the vampire null. So there's like a couple variants. But out of the official ones that we have from Wizards and like the Volo's Guide to Monster, Monster Manual, and any of the other like adjacent books, there's 4, and 3 of them are carbon copies of each other, just adding a multi attack or one single small ability, and then one of them is the Pack Lord, and even then it was very they neglect a lot of like their established monsters, so like goblins, their gnolls, the orcs. they never really put more than just like, hey, here's a couple stat blocks, base stat blocks, nothing special. And then they leave it up to the game masters to flesh it out and make them special. And I'm okay with that, but I also like having a few things that are already set up, like, hey, here's the regular standard Knoll, but then here's like a Hemomancer, which is one of the ones I did. And here's like the Hyena Master who goes and uses like their domesticated hyenas because, funnily enough, there is more about the Knoll's love of hyenas in the hyena lore than there is in the Knoll lore. Like, I think they're one sentence of like, hey, Knolls and hyenas are kindred spirits essentially, and the Knolls just see them as like their predecessors, and they see them as like good companions to do things with. And that's all in like the hyena thing, and then in like the Knoll stat block, it says Knolls like hyenas, and it just kind of gets lost. Um, it's all that philosophy, like that game design with it, and so I feel for you, Anthony.
When I first
Here's the
started,
concubines.
it was just, oh, I'll rework the one stat block that's in the book. And then I started going, well, it's kind of boring, right? I should have like multiple for like any situation. And now I'm like, I'm in way too deep. Now I'm making like,
You're a stat block 20 now or something like
yeah,
that.
it depends. Like, I'll usually try to do like a lore deep dive, and I'll try to listen to like videos and stuff like AJ Pickett that you were talking about. I'll have to try to get him one day. Let's try and snag him and get him on here to talk about lore or something. But he makes a lot of videos that are helpful when I'm like going into like creature stat blocks.
Yeah, I was gonna say AJ Pickett was one of like the first channels I really started following when I started doing D&D. It was Esper the Bard, it was AJ Pickett, and there was one more. I'm totally blanking on his name right now, but
Would that
How to
be
RPG.
Andrew Armstrong from Dawnforge Cast? No? Or is it Mr. Rex?
Mr.
Are you
Rex,
doing-
that's who
doing-
I'm
Mr.
looking
Rex.
for.
Mr.
There
Rex.
we go.
Mr. Rex.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Rex
No, not
with
really.
his deep dives.
Human.
Those were
You do this
So,
too.
little hint. After, I don't know, will AJ be upset if I say this? After January or around January, he's probably he's probably going to be more available. Right up leading up to Christmas, it's usually the big season for him. So he makes a lot of videos. You could contact him and he would probably say yes.
Oh, really?
Because yeah,
I think I like seeing
I've
guys
stuck
like...
with AJ for years because he's a New Zealander as well. So we have the same sensibilities. Culturally, we sort of meet in the same place, and so we can have differing views and still be in the same room and still speak to each other the next day. You know what I mean? Whereas not quite the same with some people that I've met. And also too, he's stuck with me with the Game Master and Dungeon Master Roundtable right throughout because I always stuck with him. I said, if somebody says to me, no, I don't want to be there if you're going to be there, I've always said, well, see you later, don't bother showing up. So yeah, you'll find that AJ will. He always jumps into small creators stuff and anybody's actually. He'll just show up. Yeah,
that's cool. So yeah, I noticed that you are pretty consistent with your upload schedule. It feels like you upload like daily, and you're always doing like creature stat block reworks too. Do you have a ritual, or do you just you're like, hey man, we're just gonna go wing it?
So it's funny because I saw you on there, and I was about to decide what monster am I going to work on for Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and it was the bloody goblin.
Hey, we could go head to head, man. It doesn't.
We could go head to head, but I don't think we need to because there's a couple of things about the goblin, and there's a reason why I've been doing a lot of D&D 5e monsters is because I'm doing it before the release of their new monster manual. Partly because I feel like things got ballsed up with the first one, and so the goblin is one of those things where the armor class is just a smidgen too high. It has got a shield and an armor, just a smidgen too high for the challenge rating, and its output in terms of damage is pretty good. It's pretty much spot on for that level. But it doesn't hit often enough because you don't have to change the numbers too much particularly at low level for things to just never seem to hit, and but other than that, there's not a lot to really do with the stat block. It's one of those times where Wizard Coast didn't actually do that much wrong. There's not much to adjust, maybe it's not got too few hit points. I mean, my group are all power gamers and game masters. They're all dungeon master, and they're all players. And so they would cream a goblin out of the stat block. It just wouldn't last 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tricky one. I'm like, do I want to do it or do I not want to do it? It was the same problem with the Manticore. Manticore really didn't need that much done to it. It was a pretty much perfect spot on it, and it was simple.
Mm-hmm.
But all this monster stuff, which will stop, because my new favorite game is Kelsey's Shadow Dark.
I love Shadow Dark. I want to talk about Shadow Dark.
I was gonna say in our last episode that we just recorded,
I was just talking about it. I was praising it.
Exactly.
Like,
we talked about Shadow Dark for like a third of it. It felt like
we'll get into great.
The monsters in here are just so good. And they capture
so awesome.
So simple, so good. I might feel differently later on. Part of the problem for me, and I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing with your channel and redoing all the stat blocks, and anybody else is doing that sort of stuff should do this. 12 years ago, I think it's 12 years ago now. Yeah, about 12. They had a beta test for D&D Next, and for 2 years, Wizards of the Coast decided to not publish any books, which you don't do. And then people were like, how can you do that? Oh, we're not going to worry about D&D making money because that's what Magic the Gathering does.
Right. Yeah.
It's making all the money. So they had already given up on the game. And so I got involved in the beta play test, kind of reluctantly. And then a friend of mine who I've had some falling outs with over time, Jonathan Longstaff, whose name is actually in the Monster Manual, as a playtester, roped me in very reluctantly into the alpha playtest, which was behind closed doors, because he had a good relationship with Mike Mills. And I don't care what anybody says. I think Mike Mills is the smart person and probably had his head screwed on. And he was part of the reason why Jonathan got into the book. And I wound up in there as well.
Is your name in here?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
That's awesome.
It's under the playtest.
You're immortalized. Look at that.
So the problem is that I did all this playtesting and I put my feedback, and of course, the thing with playtesting and being a playtester is you've got to realize that just because you said something and you thought it had any weight, doesn't mean anybody's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Nope.
And then the book comes out, and I was like, oh shit, the maths looks a mess. Nothing beyond level 5 is going to get killed, and everything is just going to be too easy. And I'm like, well, so the last 10 years I've been like playtesting. I've tried to run every single monster in this book to see what they're like multiple times if I can. And so now I'm in the process, you might say, of putting that hat back on and trying to fix them myself. Just like the maths is out. Your reliance on immunities, like they don't actually have that much of an effect on the game. Stop using damage resistance. You want to make the dungeon master halve all damage that's coming through and do more maths. Stop being difficult and making it life miserable. Just give the monster more hit points, so you don't have to worry about this.
It's interesting that you say that, because I actually think my problem with the goblin is you look at the goblin stat block and it's like they tried to make that goblin encompass every possible goblin that there is. So like you said that its AC is a little bit too high and its HP is too low. I think like for continuity reasons, it's just like probably a differencing in like DM styles. But I think like all goblins should have really low HP. But then like the only way you make them more difficult at higher levels is like increase their damage and then increase like how hard they are to hit. So like goblins are they're little sneaky bastards. So they're going to use all these backhanded tactics. They're going to like entrap you. They're going to sneak around. They're going to shoot you from trees. They're going to set up like swinging log traps that are going to hit you. So what I'm trying to do is like, how do I make a goblin really, really difficult for like a higher level party? It's not going to be like a Tarask, so it's not going to be an end game boss, obviously. They're supposed to be mob creatures. They're short, 3 foot tall guys that are trying to kill you. So what I wanted to do is like keep their hit points low, so like no higher than like 20 or 30. So like the barbarian, if he hits him, he's still gonna cleave through him. He's a little tiny guy. But if you look at like their high level stuff, it's like, oh, it's a goblin assassin, but his weapons are like draped in like wyvern poison, so he does a ton of damage. Then it's like, okay, we just have to hit him. We just have to hit him. Well, I gave him like a special trait called Dodgy Bastard, where he's always under the effects of the dodge action unless you like reduce his movement speed somehow. Then like he's easier to hit. So I went with like the route where I'm making a whole bunch of different stat blocks that like kind of encompass all levels of play using the DMG's. There's a section in the 2014 DMG where it's like 1 to 4 you're like novices, and then it's like 5 to like 10 you're like heroes of the realm, and then you're like legends, and then you're like godlike. So I'm trying to keep stuff for each of those levels of play. That's like kind of what I did with like the wyverns, although I made like a ton of stat blocks for that. But it's kind of cool listening to other people's opinions on stuff too.
Fori. So you're talking about Fori, basically.
Yeah.
So like Fori. Yeah,
that's
I
kind
read
of what I'm
Fori
doing.
and I played Fori. Yeah, I don't know if I want to go back to that. I've had the argument, that bound accuracy will solve the problem in 5e. And I mean, the monsters are bound, the players aren't. So unless you stop unbinding your players so they can just change their numbers too much, you really haven't solved the problem at all. And because critical hits exist, and in 4e critical hits are, the concept is essentially the same in 5e, and the only difference was 3.5. 3.5, you had to confirm a critical. Confirming a critical meant that critical hits did not happen very often. When they did, it was really bad. And now you get critical hits in 4e and 5e and now 6e or 5.5 or 5.24 or whatever it is.
Tasha's Cauldron of Everything 2.0, as August calls it.
Well, you get criticals a lot more, and it's bad every time there's a critical because they come up more often. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, it doesn't really matter if the monster's high level or low level. For whatever system, like the 20 hits automatically with those rules, and you get a critical. That's not really the factor. You still at least hit them. So and you could still do that in 4e. Like they could have an armor class of 40, and you add your modifier and a 20-sided dice, and you never get near 40, but you only had to roll a 20. Like
I've never actually played 4th edition, so I'm one of those guys, and I know this is like mixed reactions, but like I got into 5e from Critical Role, and I started playing in 2017. Now, I've never had players in my game who are like, oh, you're not doing this like Matt Mercer, you suck. I try to emulate Matt Mercer because he's like, I look up to him as a DM. He's a voice actor. I think he's a really good dungeon master, but I've never gotten to like experience like older systems. I did. My first time I ever played D&D was 3.5 as a player character. But in terms of like, if you compare 3.5 to 5e, it's like you have to do string theory to make your character in 3.5 because of like how skill points work, in my opinion. Some people like crunchier systems. That's what I like about Shadow Dark, as you bring up Shadow Dark, is like it's so simple, but it feels like, I don't know, like combat feels so much more like intense because you roll a d8 and that's like, oh no, not the d8. But in 5e, it's like a d8 to a barbarian is like nothing. Versus like you feel mortal, and it's like for the DM, that is so much less weight off your shoulders, or so much more weight off your shoulders to run a Shadow Dark game versus 5e, because I don't know if have you ever ran like a level 20 game before in like a 5e setting?
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't gotten that high yet, but I did run a one shot where I was like, everybody make 20th level barbarians, and we're gonna fight this boss that has 1,000 hit points, and they pretty much steamrolled it. Nobody got near death.
Yeah, so like level 20 combat isn't very much fun. And to make it fun, I have some requirements of my players, otherwise they can bugger off. And that is stop rolling your damage dice, because I'm not going to sit there while you roll a cup of dice. Okay, get yourself a dice roller, an automated dice roller. I don't care if it's on a phone or whatever however you do it. I don't care. But I don't want to sit here and have you. Even if you pre-roll the dice, they've still got to add up like a gazillion dice. and then add all their modifiers. Attack rolls is not a big deal because even with attack rolls, at level 20, maybe you have 5 if you're a fighter or a marshal, and if you action surge, it's 10. But
Yeah.
but I mean, most of my campaigns go from about level 1 to 16, but I have gone as high as 20. And at level 20, they're facing gods
Right.
and the avatars of gods, and
It's
they're
hard to
not
prep
facing just
for
one
that.
at a time. Like, I mean, I think at level 20, the people who were still willing to show up for level 20 games was like they faced off 5 or 6 different gods at the same time, and
Wow.
they won. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's
so
actually
you-
how
it's like, how do
Anthony
you-
and I met. Was we worked on a collab for a creature called the Megalomortis, which was I think we settled on CR25, but it's like an end game boss, and we really we put a lot of time in trying to encapsulate inside the stat block and inside the lore, like how this can work inside of a level 20 game, because at level 20 you're just so strong. By then, just your class features, if you don't have any magic items, if you don't have any artifacts, you're already power level god, and you have 3 to 5 of them, and
I
then
have
you
a
throw in
Vorpal sword.
magic weapons and artifacts and boons and all the fun stuff, and it's just like, yeah, no, one of these guys could take on a Tarask without even breaking a sweat.
Yeah.
yeah, at about level 17, I would say I wouldn't even worry about giving them a legendary magic item. Maybe don't give them 3 or 4 of them all at once for one character.
Right. Yeah.
But just one of those is probably not going to make any difference. Like a plus 3 to damage or plus 3 to hits. Most of the time at level 20, they only miss if they roll a 1 or a 2 on their dice.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter. But yeah. So that's kind of where my head is at. I'm playing all sorts of games. I started with AD&D, but really didn't know how to play it. That's second edition, and then I felt like I was starting to understand what the heck was going on without getting drunk. At about 3.5, and then 4E, 5E, 5.5 or 6E, or whatever the heck we want to call it nowadays. I'm going to call it 6E, I think it is. And then I've been going backwards. I played Pathfinder first ed edition. I don't think I can handle doing second ed edition. I don't care what anybody says. It can be the greatest system under the sun. But if the game is all about the system, then maybe there's a problem for me. And then Shadow Dark's been fun. Wally DM taught me how to play BackMe basic D&D. And that's been interesting to see a system with quite complicated core rules, really simple character classes, and it's still easier to play. It's still easier to play, but yeah.
Then Pathfinder, you mean? I've never played Pathfinder.
Oh, it's still easier to
myself.
play than all of them.
Oh.
It's still easier. Basic D&D is still easier to play than the likes of AD&D, which really, first ed edition didn't really have any rules at all, really. It's more like a guide and make it up.
Yeah.
And then 2E was better. And then 3.5 was just so codified. You can't bake a muffin unless you have the right feet.
Right.
Which you kind of, nowadays, is the same thing, isn't it, in 5E? Isn't there the cook? Is there a cook feat or cooking?
There might
or a background?
be.
I can't remember.
You
There's a
probably have to
cooking
have
one.
tools for it or something. Like the
Yeah, I think
tools with
I think there's a
proficiency.
special thing if you want to be a cook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your favorite system right now is Shadow Dark, then, or is it that system that you were just talking about?
My system, my favorite system currently that is published is Shadow Dark. My favorite system to play is my own game, but I just call it Mazes and Monsters, or Monsters and Mazes.
Grottos
And
and
if you understand the
Gremlins.
reference to the old movie, which is a Tom Hanks movie, I'm taking the piss a little bit. And it's really just a version of D&D. No, Supertomic is one of my favorites, but that's not published.
Okay. The Tom Hanks movie. Now you got me on a tangent. I think, is that the one where they're like glorifying the satanic panic or something like that?
No, not really. It was really just capitalizing on the satanic panic to try to get people to buy the book, and that turns into a really bad movie. And Tom Hanks is basically a young individual who's gone completely nuts and believes that everything in the game that he's playing, Mazes and Monsters, is real. Yeah,
What a
yeah. So,
what a time to be alive, huh?
mm.
So yeah, that's kind of like the more I was playing 5e, that's how I got into Shadow Dark. I was like, man, the higher level you go, the more stressful the game gets for me as the dungeon master, because I'm trying to take into account, how do I make a monster to challenge my players when they say, "Oh, I wish it was dead," because I have wish. I don't let players take wish, but like that's just an example of like high level silly town D&D that it turns into after 16th level. I think just one of my I never got to experience like older editions of D&D, and like you said, like first edition and second edition, from what I hear, because I'm like I'm only 27, but from what I hear, you have to be like a scholar to understand the rules, and you were like a special individual once you like got the
Oh,
rules down. So
so I never played AD&D first edition, and I have no desire to do so because um, it's not really a set of rules as such as you would imagine it. It's really guidance for a dungeon master making up their own rules. That's that game. Okay, so what you do is you look at how he figures out dice mechanics, explains it to you, and then says, "Now you decide how you do your dice mechanics." That was that game.
mm,
And then second edition, I haven't really played A&D second edition because I think I used like one or two rules combined with a board game and got drinking ginger beer. So yeah, it's too much like textbook, so it's a bit hard. I started with 3.5, which is, I guess, where I feel like I actually knew what I was doing, and I played 4E and I game mastered 4E and done 5E both ways. And Wally's just recently taught me how to play basic D&D because it wasn't really available in New Zealand for me. You know what I mean? I never saw it. First time I saw it, D&D was in a bookstore that disappeared a year later in Auckland City, and I'd never seen it before. Yeah, in fact, the first time I came across D&D was a bunch of people in school when I was in college, not university. College is different to us. Okay, I know you guys have got you call it college and we call it university, and our college is your high school or something. Um,
oh
Somebody said,
wow,
"Oh, there's
I
this
didn't know
game
that.
called D&D. Roll funny dice, and you can do anything you like. You'd like this, Fred," because I was constantly trying to make my own games, and I said, "Piss off," and it sounds like a joke, and I didn't want to know anything about it. I walked away. And so, yeah, so I didn't cotton on to what I was missing out on for a long time. Took a while.
Interesting. Do you have any? Well, actually, let me go here. How many games are you running right now for like players? Do you have like a long-term group that you've been running for a while right now,
Yeah,
or?
so I'm only in one game that's kind of official, uh, and that's my home group. They're all game masters. They're all players, and we rotate. It's now my turn, so I am now the game master for a while, and I believe maybe it's 4 months, 5 months. It's just a Christmas period. Nobody's sort of doing anything. It sort of shuts down at about that time when everybody goes off and does their own thing.
Mhm.
And then I believe Cajun will run a game for about a month. And then I think John's going to run something for a little one shot or something like that. And then I'll probably be back into it again. But Simon's done it for the last 3 years, so it's time for him to have a rest. And then I've been just playing in games, and Wally DM, AJ Pickett, various YouTubers have been running games. We even played Daggerheart.
I haven't tried that one yet.
Yeah, I probably won't play it again. Nothing against Critical Role, but it's not for me. And yeah, we showed Shadow Dark. Somebody ran that game for us. I'm currently running Shadow Dark myself. But yeah, so the Game Master Roundtable is now sort of where I get to play more games. Because we decided that I spent 2 years talking about Game Master advice or Dungeon Master advice with people from different YouTube channels. And it's sometimes it works. You can have differing views, and people are all right. But quite often people just wound up. It was just a pissing contest, measuring the you know what. So it's not good when you start making other people who run a YouTube channel feel bad for the way that they do things. And I talked to Wally and I said I just don't want to do that anymore. And so he said, well, let's just run games, let's just hang out and play games. So that's what we did. And if we don't wind up doing that, we usually just go fun with monsters. We just pick a monster and say, what stupid shit can we do with it? And just come up with the most ridiculous things under the sun. Some useful and some probably not. So yeah, that's generally how we've been doing it.
That's cool. Do you play like in person, or is it mostly all with the people online?
Mostly in person until the pandemic, and the problem is our government doesn't really announce what's going on, but I know the death rate's still the same. So, and I work in the health sector, 3 days a week. So, yeah, I wear a mask when I go out. And every time I don't put the mask on, like I either get sick, because obviously I've come in contact with somebody who wandered out there and it was not well. And yeah, it takes too long to recover from COVID and other things. And occasionally people notice me, which I was quite surprised. So I keep the mask on when I go out. It's weird. I'm in a tiny little, it's like a ghost town here. And yet there's still people who will notice me. And I'm like, okay.
Because you're a legend.
No.
You're a legend.
It's just, yeah. I keep forgetting, like I can't walk into the supermarket because if I don't have a mask on, somebody might notice me and like, okay.
Go, hey, Fred.
Especially if you, I was gonna say, especially if you wear the iconic hat.
The iconic.
Yeah,
Fred
well, I'm
hat.
not wearing the cat hat when I go out into public. That's
fair enough.
but yeah, and it's not that I don't want to chat with them. It's just
well, it probably
a few years back, somebody said something really scary when I was in a live stream, and they started describing where I was, and they said, I know where you are, and I was like, okay,
yeah,
don't show up at my door, and don't show up at my door.
That's pretty scary. Yeah. Well, I mean, that does mean that you are at least a little bit famous. If you have people,
no, it just means that there's a lot of people maybe in my area that are playing D&D, and at the time there was only 20 channels, and they probably noticed mine. That's probably all it was. Fortunately, I don't have that problem quite so much nowadays. But yeah.
Do you have, so since you have all this experience with like running games, do you have any problem player stories? Like, you have any like RPG horror stories to share with us? I always ask everybody this just because it's funny to hear stories about like problem players and stuff.
So Cody from Taking 20, he was very well known for clickbait, and everybody does the taboos and the mistakes that DMs or players make, and I don't really like giving advice on problem players and problem DMs, just because I always feel like it winds up going down this path of ill repute, basically. And the things they always list off as being problems for problem player things that to be concerned about. I'm like, really, is that a big problem for you? You haven't experienced the true aspect of what is a big problem. I guess if I had to give you 5 things, I don't know if I'll get 5. I'll see how many.
I was meaning like in terms of like, have you ever experienced, like, do you have like a story where you're like, what is this guy
I have had people who have done really, really stupid things, and it's not been good. Right. And that happens because I ran games in stores in New Zealand, right?
Yeah, I can't do that.
And 5e. And so I was running a Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League. It's like taking a dungeon master when you get involved in that, and I imagine it's probably worse in the States. But New Zealand, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, probably the biggest D&D players playing player base in the world. The rest of them couldn't care less. But maybe the UK is a little bit not quite so far down the list. But yeah, people will steal people's stuff. Hit on somebody they shouldn't be hitting on.
Oh God!
Like Grammy.
Bringing up the topic of RAP, which is code for RAP,
Uh-huh.
is a product of too many men getting together, getting too drunk, and letting their topic get a little bit out of hand. It's very embarrassing when you're running a game when that sort of thing happens.
I can imagine.
Or just doing really horrible things to people, not their characters, but just to people. Well,
Yeah.
So no, definitely I've experienced that. Game stores rough. That's why I don't run public games anymore. I stopped doing that, and I don't run paid games because I'd have to tolerate people that I wouldn't want to tolerate.
Mhm.
You'd have to pay me, but I don't think it would be enough.
Right.
So yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'll leave that. There's plenty of people out there who want to get paid to do that sort of thing. So let
Mhm.
them suffer.
Yeah, I
I
would
mean,
never run for like a public setting because I have to
it's
screen
hard.
people. Yeah.
It's like it's literally like you being thrown to a piranha,
Right.
or a big huge swarm of piranhas, and just see what happens. Some people are lovely, really really nice. And unfortunately, they might have to contend with a whole people who are like piranhas around them, like they're eating you alive and they're eating everybody else alive. You're like, oh my god, if we could just sort of, and you can't ask them to leave quite often because they're, the things that people will do aren't so bad that you can kick them out of the store.
Mhm.
I mean, even if you go to the somebody who owns the shop or the staff, like that, there's certain criteria as long as they don't break those rules, and it's all right. But sometimes there's sort of, stores in New Zealand have to charge, otherwise there's no D&D in stores. It's either that or Magic the Gathering. That's how it is. So when I
Actually, that's
convinced the
what I
stores
played.
to charge, they were much more open to the idea of running games in stores. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, we have Adventures League out here as well, and the game store that I go to the most, it's not my favorite game store, but my favorite game store where I live is on the complete other side of the city that I live in. It's like a 40-minute drive versus the like 5-10 minute drive because it's like a mile down the road. But the one that's nearby me, they were putting out a thing for like Adventures League and for like they were looking for DMs. And I was thinking about it, and then I was talking to another buddy who had run, and I just heard too many things, too many similar stories to that, where it was like, dude, it was so cringy. We had this guy and like the things that he was trying to do. It really turned me off from doing it. Where I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to because I don't know how I would handle, adult men creeping on. Because where we live, the area we live in, we have a lot of young people who also like playing. So you have like these adults that are like in their like 40s, 50s, and then you have like 15, 16-year-old kids at the same table, and it just sometimes doesn't mesh well. And so we'll kind of leave it there because I don't want to go too much into like his horror story
Yeah.
that he had with it. But I was like, yeah, I don't know how I would deal with it. I don't know what I would want to do in this situation. It just sounded super uncomfortable. I was like, I'm done. I'm not even gonna do that. I was done before I even started.
It's not just players too. The problem is for game stores is getting dungeon masters who are willing to run games for people who they know are strangers and not their friends. You know, I've always found most game stores, if there's a home group and they want to bring their friends and just run their game in the store, they're like happy, particularly if they'll also pay for the space. Then why would you do that if you could just do that in your lounge? So it's not going to happen very often. But I mean, I always found there was almost no dungeon masters during the 4E release of that game. Like 4E, I was like the only one left in New Zealand doing store games, and then 5E was disastrous too. Like nobody wanted to do it because it was a new system. So I wound up running games for game masters or dungeon masters who had played older versions of D&D, so that they get familiar with it, and then hopefully, if I could convince them and cajole them and convince the stores to bribe them with enough stuff, they would come back and be a game master or dungeon master for 5E. But it took years. It took a long, long time. And it's not like 5E was instantly a success. It was really hard in New Zealand. I don't know. Maybe it was the same in the States. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Um,
D&D here in the States, at least from my perspective, like I remember 3.5. So that was my introduction when I was like a kid, 3.5. And I had a buddy whose dad would like run some of like the neighborhood kids through like different one shots and whatnot every once in a while. And so that was like my introduction. I don't usually say I started playing until fifth edition just because that's when I actually was like looking into it. I bought like books. I was playing it regularly, not just like, hey, like once every year or so, playing like a random like one shot of pre gens and stuff like that. But yeah, especially for fourth edition. Like I don't remember hearing anything, and that's like when I was in like high school, and that's when you'd think like that's when you're hearing about it. Because most people find out about D&D around high school to college time, and yeah, there was nothing for like 4E, and then fifth edition came out, and I remember seeing people talking about it, and some of my friends were starting to get into it, and then I was like, yeah, I remember I kind of played this back years ago with like Eli's dad and stuff like that. And yeah, and then it blew up. You had Stranger Things really helped. You had Critical Role, the pandemic, really just kept each one of those just kept escalating where D&D was. So like you had the initial big release and people were like very interested in it, and then as it started to go down, then you had it like the revamp with like Critical Role and Stranger Things, and then as that's starting to wane, then you had COVID blow up and make it so much bigger, and now we have 2024 version, and from what I've heard and seen, it's not doing as well as they were hoping, and so we'll kind of see what the next big thing is that like escalates it, if it is even for D&D or whatever tabletop.
I got all I need right
Yeah.
here. I don't have to get a new edition.
No. Yeah, I was like, I've
Except
got a couple of
Shadow
different
Guard.
Dungeon Master guides, so yeah,
Mhm.
I've got a few. I don't really feel like I need to get the new one, even though I do have the online version that somebody paid for me. I didn't bother buying it myself. I don't really buy. Look, the only thing I purchased this year, usually I just like, if you want me to talk about your book, send the book to New Zealand, and then they're like, oh, what's the shipping? And then I never hear from them again. So
Shadow
this book
Guard.
here cost me $100 plus a PDF,
Oh
New Zealand, $52 for freight, shipping.
man.
And I was
That's a
expecting to
lot.
see it sometime next year because it was out of print, and it showed up a couple of weeks ago, and I was really quite happy and pleased. Um, but yeah, also stores. When you think about it, stores are in this awkward position because when they get a game master or a dungeon master willing to run a game, they don't want to let them go, even when they may be scaring people away. And this was always a problem I had as an organizer for AD and for Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League, is that if they had somebody that was willing to do it, like unless they were punching them people in the face, we kind of had to keep them. And the store didn't want to get rid of them because who do they replace them with? Nobody. And there's a lot of people wanting to play the game, and so you wind up in these weird situations where I find most dungeon masters willing to run games in stores are pretty good. But when you do have somebody which you would prefer not to be running a game, store is still going to let them run games just because they need somebody to fill the slot. And it probably was 2015 before Stranger Things and Critical Role and all that sort of stuff that 5e started to pick up. I would say about a year and a half into it. I would say definitely after a year from the release in 2014, we started to see 5e taking. It wasn't going to disappear into the ether. It was actually going to survive, but it took a long time, and it really didn't kick into full swing until about 2 years later. I think Mike Mills had said 2 years later, and I agree with him. I think he's right. It took that long. We really weren't seeing very much going on. 4E was weird. Nobody wanted to dungeon master it. Nobody wanted to buy the books. Everybody wanted to play the game. The number of players we had to, the stores like, I've got 20 people who want to play D&D 4E, and a little store in New Zealand. Nobody wants to run the game, and that was a weird situation. So But
Yeah, I think a lot of people hated 4E from what I heard when it came out. Just because I think the common thing that I hear is they tried to make it too much like a video game, like World of Warcraft or something. I never played it, but I kind of like how they did like their creatures at least. Like I like how they gave you a variety to choose from, so you have like something to work with. So like I actually do look through some of the older like fourth edition books when I'm looking to rework something like the Goblin from fifth edition, because I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Why don't they just do that with this one? So like I'll steal ideas and stuff and reflavor them.
yeah, I'm not surprised. I suspected you were doing that when you were talking about you're making different versions.
Hmm.
The problem with 4E and doing it that way is your monsters become a stat block or just a series of stat blocks, and there's no narrative and no lore left. And Dungeons and Dragons 4E monster manuals were notorious for having really garbage lore and or none. They would describe the monster, which they had a picture for. Oh, good. So now we've got a picture and a description. We don't know anything else about the monster. You have to go and find a different book or go on the internet and find out about that monster, or watch a video, I guess. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem when a system works that way. So yeah, again, you can get away with squeezing quite a few monsters on one page in Shadow Dark. So
Yeah.
if Wizards of the Coast was smart, I would suspect that their new release for 50 years would have done much better if it was more like Kelsey's Shadow Dark, and they did the onto it variant rules that you can attach, like you want to trick out your car, your engine, and make it go a bit faster, or just make silly noises, or do whatever the heck it is you want your game system to do, and change it up by having a lot of variant rules you can attach and unbolt and so forth. I think that would have been smarter. But instead, they went the way of 3.5, which is let's see if your head will melt with weapon masteries and bonus action spells, and a few other things.
Then the players get you. That's how they get you. They added this new rule. DM, didn't you know that my weapon saps and makes your monster have disadvantage on its next attack roll now?
The good news is I'm going to pull out another weapon, and on the same turn, I'll make another attack, and it's going to be with a different weapon. It does something different completely. So yeah.
Boy, it's just more fun for the dungeon master, more stuff for us to deal with. Go ahead.
There's nothing wrong with a 6-hour combat. Come on.
Right. that's what's making me like get so tired of 5e is how long the combat lasts. And that's why I like Shadow Dark, because in 5e combat, you have your two things, they march up to each other, bang, 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 that one's dead. Okay, then we move to the next one. And you don't run away, because if you do, you get an attack of opportunity, or you have a bonus action. I like how Shadow Dark just has, you have a movement and then you have an action. There's no reaction for anything. It's simplified, but that's like, it's modifiable, like you said. So that's 5e has like good bones, but like very rarely do I ever see anybody just take something out of this and run it bare bones straight out the book, because like you kind of have to throw something into it.
Thank you for listening until the end. Our conversation with Fred lasted for over 2 hours, so we're going to split it here. But come back next week for part 2.